to the Tuesday, July 8th version of the Camden Select Board. We are streaming live on YouTube /Town of Camden, Maine. And if you wish to participate remotely, as in Zoom, where our colleague Chriso is joining us, and Jeremy Martin, I see, is there, you may go to the town website and click on the Zoom link for this meeting. And if you would like to participate, please raise your hand, give us an idea that you're over there, and we'll do our best to notice you and include you. That being said, we will come to order and first ask for public comment on non-agenda items. Please come forward and state your name and residence.
Ray Andresen, Camden resident and taxpayer. I would like to bring to your attention two issues with some of the wording on Article 7 regarding removal of Montgomery Dam spillway that was approved by Camden voters on June 10th this year. First, it says that, and I quote, "The town is authorized to fund the work only from non-property tax revenue sources, for example, grants and private donations." Please note that there is no reference to future, current, or previous property tax revenue sources, so it therefore includes, in addition to future property taxes, anything that has been collected and budgeted for current expenses, as well as any property taxes that have been accumulated in our reserve accounts over the years. And second, the phrase "fund the work" could be interpreted as meaning every cost from June 11th onward involved in removing the Montgomery Dam spillway, including both physical and administrative work done by town employees to secure permits or grants, to supervise road closures and traffic control, to provide landscaping or erosion control, etc., etc. Anything to do with the removal of Montgomery Dam. Sorry, I don't need to repeat everything, do I?
Thank you.
Okay, so now I am asking you, the members of our select board, how are you going to make sure that none of our property tax revenue, either already collected or collected in the future, is used for any part of this project? Obviously, I don't expect an answer tonight, but I believe you need to address these concerns quickly and come up with an auditing plan to oversee all of these expenses in order to keep your promise to Camden's taxpayers and the voters of Camden who approved Article 7. I've got copies here for everybody, if you want to pass those out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Anyone else have a non-agenda item? Yes, please. Thank you.
Wendy Andresen, also taxpayer. I and a lot of other people would like to know what's going to happen about cleanup of the island. I'm assuming, I hope wrongly, that now that your plan is to take down the dam and the waterfall, that you are not going to clean up the island. I hope I'm wrong. I hope you still plan to do it. Otherwise, I don't know why the bridge is there. I think the bridge should be taken out if this isn't in your plan. I know the grand scheme all along has been to remove not only 39 Main Street, but all the others up through the nail salon, so that you can have a nice view of the new project and have another bridge that will cross from there over to, from the island over to where the Harbor Park is. And I just don't see why the bridge is there if you're not going to clean up the island. That was the intention of the bridge. And we sure don't want to see that big eyesore remaining there. I don't think the bridge is ugly. I think it was beautifully made, beautifully built, but I think it doesn't belong there. It's an eyesore where it is. It does not fit into the natural landscape. And I know a lot of you are into having everything be natural, right, Allison? Like the natural look, the natural look.
I do like the natural look.
You do like the natural look, but that bridge does not look natural there. It's really, it's just jarring to see that in the midst of all that beautiful water course and the rock and everything, to see that really, that bridge just looks out of place there. And if you're not going to use it to clean up the island, then you owe it to people to take the thing down, because that was what it was designed for, to be a gangway to go over and clean up the island. And I want to see it down. I know a lot of other people said the same thing to me. Yes, I know people walk out on it because it's there. It's a bridge, it's there, and people go out on it and say, oh, wow, look at everything, it's beautiful. But just because it's there. If it weren't there, people would be saying, oh, look at this beautiful water course, look at the waterfall. So it's not really a feature, it doesn't belong there, it looks out of place. So it's not even like a nice arched stone bridge or a beautiful, delicate suspension bridge. It's just industrial looking, commercial looking. And it's jarring to see it in the midst of all that natural beauty. So I hope it comes out. Either that or preferably get the island cleaned up first and then get the thing out of there. Okay, see ya.
Thank you, Wendy. Any further public input on non-agenda items? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to approval of the board minutes from June 17th, 2025. Any questions, comments, additions, deletions? Why is this so small that I can't read it?
Yeah, Susan, I have a small correction.
Okay,
There was a discussion of the professional performance review for the town manager, and the discussion was about what's the appropriate way to address that. And we decided that the appropriate way to address that would be at the goal setting session on August 4th, but that's not reflected in the minutes, and I think it should be.
okay, you are absolutely right.
Fine with me.
Any other notes? Thank
I-
you. Oh, go ahead.
Susan, I have
Yes,
one,
Chris, thank you.
which is just that on the motion to approve previous minutes, I actually abstained from that vote because I was not present for those meetings. And that the minutes as presented show a 5-0-0 vote on those two.
Hey, Renee, is there any way to just turn that down ever so
Down a little?
slightly? I would move to approve the minutes as amended.
You gonna second?
Yes, I will second that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? 500. Thank you so much. Next, we have a public hearing for a new establishment, 8 Bells Pub at 45 Mechanic Street, for a new Class A restaurant liquor license. And you'll see in your packet a rather thorough application. And we have the principals here to tell us about the new restaurant.
Yeah, that's correct. Hi, folks. My name is Tom Ryan. This is my partner, Abby. Together, we're hoping with your blessing to open 8 Bells Irish Pub, 45 Mechanic Street. What do I have to say about 8 Bells? Does everyone know the story of 8 Bells? So 8 Bells signifies, so my background, let me back it up. My background is in maritime. I went to sea for 25 years or so, and came shore-based when I came here to Camden with my partner Abby, and I began working over at Lyman Morris. But I've always had this dream of opening an Irish pub from my days working in Boston in the pub scene. Grew up in a big Irish Catholic family. It was just part of our culture. How I tie it all together with 8 Bells, 8 Bells signified on ships change of watch. That was always so whenever you'd hear 8 bells rung on a ship, that would mean you're off shift or you're coming on watch or whatever it might be. But it was always more than that. Wasn't just you're off shift. It was either you're going to see family, you're going to see your mates, or you're going to relax, things to that nature. So I thought it was only fitting to named the establishment 8 Pals. So that was kind of background on that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any questions from the board regarding this application?
Oh, just a curiosity question. What's on the second floor? I couldn't tell anything I couldn't read the plans.
It's an apartment. It's an apartment. I do not own the apartment, but we did go through like rigorous construction to make sure it's like safe. So the fire department was very well involved with that and making sure it's. But anyway, to answer your question, it's an apartment.
Thank you.
Yeah, and they are the people that own said apartment are here only 2 weeks out of the year, so it's not necessarily going to be an issue, and they're 100% on board with what we're doing. So
I think it's great to have more life there, and it used to be a much more lively part of town, and I think
Yeah.
it's been sad for some people to see it, just become more and more residential. As much as we love the residences, it's supposed to be the downtown where people can go and be awake and lively, so I think,
I want
Make
to provide
noise
a
and have fun.
community space. I mean, that's the goal, and for you to say, well, I know 8 Bells is open.
yeah,
That's-
that would
Yeah.
be so wonderful. And
That's my goal.
It's
That's
8:00. Oh, wait, it's 9:00.
Right.
So we can go someplace.
everything, it's been sad to
2 to
see.
10 will be the hours.
2 to 10. Brilliant.
And how many days a week?
7.
Really?
I'm doing
That's
it.
great.
I'm doing it.
How's
Gotta do it.
how's
Gotta
the
do it.
staffing going?
Good. Yeah. I have
Really?
a pretty strong team behind me. So
Wow.
along with Abby, Abby's going to be assisting. But yeah, we do have a strong team, and yeah,
People seem to be struggling for staff.
pretty excited. I mean, there's a lot of, not to take up a lot of time, but there's been quite a lot of positive feedback. A lot
response.
of people showing up. A lot of people asking, "When is it opening?" So
Excellent.
we're getting there. So
Good.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the board? Is there anyone here present who would like to speak for or against this item? Seeing none, turn it over to the board. Can we have a motion?
I move to approve the application for 8 Bells Pub.
I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Brilliant,
excellent.
good luck.
Well,
We
we'll
look
see you in a
forward to
couple
it. Okay.
Pressure's on.
Pressure's
Thanks,
on.
folks.
So the consent agenda, item 4, is the renewal of the approval of the victualler and lodging licenses, and I'll just read these out. Is the 8 Bells Pub, which we just approved, the Bagel Cafe, Bagel Factory, Camden River House, Lodge at Camden Hills, Mixed Greens, and Subway. I guess we just approve those if there's no discussion on any of those items.
Yep. It passes without objection.
Yep. Okay. And item B is the approval of the annual request for a block party on July 12th from 4 PM to 9 PM on Central Street between Cross and Trim.
Oh, yeah. I mean, usually we would just do it as a
Yeah.
block if it's on the consent
Right.
agenda, so.
Right. I always get the consent agenda. I haven't quite figured that out.
It's just if nobody
Thank
says
you.
anything, it just
No-
goes. If
nobody
you
says
talk
anything.
about
I
it,
just
then
thought
it's.
we'd talk about the party and.
I mean, there is something lost with too many things
know.
going on the consent agenda, but
All right, done. All right, we'll move on to the 5th item, which is select board reports. Has anyone got anything they would like to report?
Yes, I just wanted to remind folks that the Historic Resources Committee will be hosting a pair of workshops to which the public is invited and encouraged to come. And this is in preparation for their drawing up the historic preservation ordinance. And so the two events are both in the coming week. They are on July 10th at 6 o'clock right here in this room, and also on July 15th right here in this room, 6 to 7:30. And it's a conversation and a discussion about how to the format and the content of the historic preservation ordinance.
Excellent. Thank you. Chris, got anything?
I have nothing to report.
Allison?
The Conservation Commission is working on the emerald ash borer response recommendations. They've started discussions with a local arborist, Shane Hendricks, who looks like he's going to be able to use some of the data that was collected years ago, where the town was actually one of the first in the state to come up with an emerald ash borer response plan. We had an intern that went around and identified all the ash trees and put them into one GIS system. Now that's being transferred into our overall GIS, and the Conservation Commission is going out and sort of ground truthing that and what may have changed in the last 5 years or so. The way that if you do nothing, then all the ash trees die, and you can look online and see. Oh, really? From the ash borer?
Yeah.
In Camden?
Yeah.
I hope that's not true, because we don't think that it's gotten quite here yet.
Okay, I'll
So,
confirm.
Hopefully that's something else that's killed
Okay.
them. But it would be like groundbreaking. You're at like an urgent update, but it is getting closer. And so what can happen is that certainly the the large town-owned street trees that are ash trees, what you can do is you identify them and then you inject them with ivermectin, and that can be at the last time that we looked into, it could be a couple $1,000s a tree. But then it also, you spare that expense. In addition to just the value of trees in general, there is a cost to taking them all down. And so you see what's happened in some of these other towns where like the whole town looks, hopefully nothing that close. But there have been other, like the Dutch elm disease and all these things that came through and wiped out all the trees. So the plan is to identify the priority trees for treatment. At some point, there might be privately owned trees that we would look at some point to say, okay, this might not be right in the right of way, but it's of significant enough value to the town that we might discuss ways to help either just educate the property owner or, maybe if somebody doesn't have the money to treat their own tree. So they're working on recommendations for that. We've started over at Midco Solid Waste with some of the auditing for the inventory of what is coming into the facility that I talked about before. So you might, if you're over at the transfer station, you might see interns and people from second story builders that are working on, inventorying what is coming into the facility, with the emphasis on items of value that are not being salvaged at this point. We put a lot of emphasis on those plastic, all the recyclable items, but there's a lot of old growth lumber and various things that go into the landfill that have value that we're not capturing. So you might see somebody around there with a clipboard or even asking you at the gatehouse for a little bit more information, and that's part of that project that we talked about before. And that is it for me.
Excellent, thank you. I attended the Harbor Committee meeting this morning, and we got an update from the harbor master that things are really more quiet in the harbor than they would normally be at this time of year. Usually 4th of July feels like a big kickoff. There were a number of many more moorings available. So we're hoping that this week things will start to ramp up more, whether it's because it was a cooler start to the season, fewer boats in the water, but that was worth noting. Steve also did tell us that he had installed the repurposed floats from Steamboat to be used as a kayak facility over by the library. And then received instructions to remove them, so those are no longer there. Aesthetically, I guess they didn't meet the criteria that was hoped for in that spot, but,
That's not exactly what,
well,
um,
yeah,
yeah, we could have a larger
yeah. talk
discussion about that. It might not have been represented in the right way, but overall, the floats were on the beach
Yeah.
a large part of the time. They weren't floating
Right.
a lot of the time. And so then the library and the town in general has gone through this process of identifying what's important to people. And one of the things people really like is the beach there.
Right.
And
To have
so,
it filled up with those.
right. And so when you have the floats just resting on
Mm-hmm.
all that seaweed that people like to walk down there, and
Mhm, mhm.
it'd be one thing if the floats were, floating
Floating.
all the time, but it's,
Yeah.
so, and I think that they had thought maybe it was just going to be one, and then there were five.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but
So those are now gone, and we're back to the beach that people like, and hopefully coming up with another way. We talked a lot about how people are enjoying taking small boats out, and how can we facilitate that in town at other locations. So that's an ongoing discussion.
we do need more kayak racks. They did talk about that. I'm on the
Yeah.
library liaison too, and I
Yeah,
think there is recognition of like, okay, let's work with the town to figure out maybe on the public landing side, there can be more kayak racks,
Yeah.
or they were open to discussing maybe kayak racks.
and
Also.
there's an openness on the Harbor Committee too, to recognize that it's great for people to have a really low barrier to entry to be able to
Totally.
get out on the water. So that was the gist of our discussion. And then a little bit of talk about harbor revenues and expenses, and sort of clarifying that, and the benefit that the harbor is to the town, and how we just, which category things get put into. I think that we're still looking for a little bit more, or there are members of the committee who are looking for a little bit more clarity about how revenues and expenses get categorized relative to the harbor, but overall for it to be recognized that it is a net benefit to the town, a net positive revenue source. So that's it for me.
Just a quick question. Where did the floats go that got removed?
They were sold and moved to, a gentleman bought them down, who is starting a small lobster co-op down in Georgetown, I think he said, and they were sort of past their useful life for here, because they were okay in that very sheltered spot, but they were quite,
Falling apart. Like
they were
it's like-
wonky. So someone came and took them off our hands, and is hopefully putting them to good use. So, yeah. Okay, so on to discussion items. The first one we have, yes, I'm sorry. Yes. Oh, and I would like to just thank Holly for stepping in to fulfill Audra's role and keep us up to date from the manager's desk. Thank you,
Are you
Holly.
going to say where Audra, I feel like maybe just say what Audra's doing too, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, Audra's off for the next 3 weeks, not off, but working hard down at the Kennedy School in Cambridge, taking a management course. Yeah. So we look forward to hearing back from her when she gets back at the end of the month. So I would like to begin by recognizing the loss of Rockport Police Officer Travis Ford, who died suddenly Monday morning of cardiac complications. On behalf of the town of Camden, we're all deeply saddened to hear of Officer Ford's passing. We'd like to offer his family and coworkers our heartfelt condolences during this incredibly difficult time. Travis started working for the town of Rockport in 1999, dedicating many years of his life to protecting and serving the community with honor, courage, and selflessness. Chief Randy Gagne has described Travis as one of the finest officers he's ever worked with, and as someone who thinks about everything he does, cares about the town, and is a true professional. May we all find a modicum of comfort in knowing that Travis's legacy will live on through the countless lives he touched and the impact he made throughout this career. This loss is profound, and we wish his family and all the officers who worked with him strength, peace, and support in the days ahead. Ken already mentioned the Historic Resources Committee holding their 2 public workshops, and to gather information. I'll continue on and say that it's to gather information and feedback on a proposed historic preservation ordinance. The second public workshop will be on Tuesday, July 15th, the first being on Thursday, July 10th, and both of them will be at 6 p.m. You recall that in November 2024, at the special town meeting, voters approved a non-binding advisory referendum question, enabling the committee to continue developing such an ordinance. And this workshop is of interest to all Camden residents, as well as private and commercial property owners in the High Street, Great Fire, and Chestnut Street historic districts, as well as those interested in the town's properties and locally designated historic landmarks, including Curtis Island Light, the Opera House, Yacht Club, Village Green Public Library, and the amphitheater. And believe it or not, the post office. For Parks and Recreation, Jeff Nathan and OSI hosted a public hybrid meeting on June 26th to discuss progress and preliminary concepts, as well as SE Group, I should mention them as well. Concepts of the Snowball's multi-season master plan. At the meeting, they discussed community ideas that will be included in the final project plan, which Jeff and the folks from OSI and SE Group will be here tonight and will update you all on. The Opera House hosted the most successful jazz in June yet, culminating with a full house for the Spyro Gyra 50th anniversary show. The Friday night concert featured Julia Keefe, Indigenous jazz vocalist and rising star. Dave Morrison also reports that this week the Opera House is hosting the Missoula Children's Theater for Theater Week, during which young people from 6 to 18 years old learn and then perform a musical play. This year, they will present Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I can tell you that I think that there's a lot of dwarfs stomping around upstairs throughout
More
the
than
days.
7?
Yeah, more than 7, certainly. Cumberland's Julia Gagnon, a finalist on American Idol, is set to perform on Friday, July 18th. And August looks to be busier than ever this year with free Summer Sounds concerts at the Snow Bowl for 4 of the month's Sundays, 2 Bob Marley shows, the Camden Conference, Camden Ballet Theater, and folk singing icon Noel Paul Stuckey, who will be performing during Windjammer Festival weekend. July 1st marked the first day of the new service contract with Northeast Mobile Health Services and the arrival of one of their ambulances, which is now housed at the Public Safety Building. It's been a dozen years since an ambulance was stationed and staffed in Camden. The new collaborative effort results in the ambulance being staffed with a paramedic from Northeast Mobile Health and a firefighter EMS provider from Camden Fire. This ambulance will be the primary acute emergency medical service ambulance for the towns of Camden, Hope, and Lincolnville. And we look forward to enhancing services and improving response times, among other benefits that are going to come with working together for the better good. In the town office, we continue to issue new pine tree and no tree plates. Things have gone fairly smoothly, although I can tell you that I've heard a lot of questions, and there have been a lot of unanticipated changes to the process caused by the state that they keep sort of sending new, here's what we'd like to do now, and here's what we'd like to do in the future. But the girls are keeping up in the office, in the front office with, what's happening and doing a great job assisting residents. The new town office, new town finance and clerk's office hours begin this Friday, July 11th. Monday through Friday, office hours remain the same from 7:30 to 3:30, while Fridays will now be from 7:30 a.m. to noon. And as Audra had stated during discussions with the Budget Committee and the Select Board back in March and April, a full-time finance office position, which is currently vacant, was not funded in the FY26 budget. And by closing early on Fridays, office staff are given much-needed uninterrupted time to complete back-office tasks and catch up on any pending projects. On the public works side, work has begun to construct the pump station building at Riverside Drive. The foundation work is done. They plan on starting the actual pipe work for the sewer extension from Mountainside to Riverside around the second week of August, weather dependent. We'll be sending out an RFP for sewer pipelining next week, which will help reduce I&I found during ongoing camera work around town at various locations. Half of the stormwater work is done on Gould Street, which remains on schedule. They're shooting to mill and pave the road with the first coat of binder mid-August. And then curbing and sidewalk work follows that later this fall. And then a final course of paving will be done next summer after this summer's work has had a little time to settle. Over on Rawson Avenue, there's not much to report in that we're still waiting on the bridge to be built by the contractors before the rest of that project can continue. Following the long holiday weekend, people have begun to notice that most of the parking lines around town are now green. This new color coding corresponds with the future expanded paid parking program. And as many people have assumed or figured out, the green stripes indicate the paid parking spaces. The program is still a ways off from going live as we're waiting on the arrival of the kiosk meters, which then need to be installed in the strategic locations around town. We continue to meet with the parking and enforcement program folks remotely on software and custom programming setup. And we've been anticipating a launch at the end of this month, but nothing is set in stone. And I can tell you, I'm not sure how that's going to go along, but there's several loose ends to tie up, but it's coming together. We've not rolled out much information beyond what's been put into the most recent newsletters as we await delivery and staff training and adjust the software setup. Once we have our hands on the systems and can try them out, while there's ample opportunity to make changes post-launch, we really want to make the process as efficient and easy as possible out of the gate for both visitors and residents. And speaking of the holiday weekend, I don't know if any of you stayed in town and were able to take advantage of the July 4th activities around town, but I can personally report both the music at the amphitheater and the fireworks over the harbor were excellent. Crowds downtown for the fireworks were huge, and all three bands drew in large numbers as well. Kudos to Camden Rotary Club and the Camden Area Business Group, along with the myriad sponsors and volunteers, for putting off a safe, enjoyable, and well-attended Independence Day event. That's all I've got.
Awesome. Thank you, Holly. Great report. Okay, on to the discussion items, and the first one is the Boston Post cane, and I'm going to let Allison kick this off since she brought it to our attention.
So glad I see actually Elizabeth Moran is here. Elizabeth is like the little angel on everybody's shoulder, reminding us every so often about this. And it's been a couple years since we've done it, and also a couple years since or at least a year since the select board talked about the policy that goes along with that. And since it's mostly new people on the select board since that last discussion, was sort of excited to be able to talk about it. The Boston Post cane, just as basic background information, was a tradition that started in about 1909 by the Boston Post. It was actually a strategy to try to increase newspaper sales. They thought if they could get all the towns talking about some of the oldest residents in town and sharing stories, that could help them sell more newspapers. But they distributed about 700 of these really nicely made canes to different towns, and Camden was one of them. And the idea is that it honors the oldest person in town. And different towns have come up with different policies surrounding that. Some just stick to, whoever is the oldest holds on to it, and until they pass on, and then they look for the next oldest person. Some towns have rigid requirements. Camden is one that has historically been among the most rigid. For years and years, it was a 75-year residency requirement oftentimes without exceptions made. It was only for military service that exceptions would be made, and that wasn't just any military service. You had to be in war, deployed. And so there's certainly people that have missed out over the years that, and I think a couple years ago we had, and then there are other people, for instance, that have moved to, they may have lived in Camden their entire life, and then they move to like the Knox Center for Long-Term Care or now Breakwater. And, you know, that was disappointing for some people. They're like, oh, I almost got the Boston Post cane. And then now they have no, you know, nursing facility in Camden for me. And so now I don't get that. It's just, so, you know, the whole idea of it was to highlight the stories of our oldest residents, those who, you know, of course, who would want that. If somebody doesn't want to be highlighted, we would avoid doing that. But so the most recent time that this was done was Pearl Wadsworth, and that was in 2020. She passed away in 2022. She was at Quarry Hill. In 2020, she was 102. So I guess she was around 104. And I think now we need to look for the next person. The practice, it used to be that they would actually give the cane to the person. And then there was a lot of trouble sometimes getting the cane back. And so the last few years, or for as long as I've known about it, that the cane stays, pass that along. The cane itself is in the town office. And the person's name goes on a plaque. I think it would be nice maybe if we were to create some replicas or something and be able to give people something, but also to move forward in looking for the person. We've found, I spoke with Amy Rollins, who works at Quarry Hill, and they have at least 3 people who are over 100 at Quarry Hill.
Who have been longtime Camden
Where
residents.
that is to be determined, but I think it would be nice to have people reach out to Holly, perhaps to the town, to Holly's email address, or to the select board, and we could forward that along. But if you think you might be the oldest person in town, or if you know of the oldest
And you're
person
watching
in
this
town,
meeting right now.
there have been times in the past where multiple people have been honored, Janice told me. So, you know, because sometimes you think you found the oldest and then you find out that you didn't. And so rather than turning it into something where it's a super competitive type of thing, I think it's an opportunity to, you know, maybe fine tune our criteria a little bit, see what we get, highlight you know, if there are a few people that are, you know, this person has been a 50-year resident and is 99, and, you know, we've got a 10-year resident who's 102, you know, why not highlight both of those people? And this, you know, the select board, I think, seeing what we get, could figure out how that plays into the exact criteria of who is the official recipient. But the rules are our making. The intent of it is to highlight our oldest residents and their stories. And so I would hope that we could move forward with that, ask around who are some of the oldest people in town, reach out to Holly or to any of us. Let's try to collect their stories, highlight some of them in the newsletter perhaps, and figure out where the next Boston Post cane, whether it be a replica or not the real one, I guess should stay in the town office, but, you know, figure out the next official recipient. So I don't know if anybody else has thoughts, or if Elizabeth maybe
would
has
you like to add?
any insight.
I really don't.
Sorry.
It's just good to see you.
Right.
Thank you for coming.
I fear if I don't come to the microphone, my Aunt Barbara Dyer will come back and haunt each and every one of you. Unfortunately, she never got the Boston Post cane, and she was his most vociferous advocate of that we continue this tradition. So I'm here on her behalf and urge you to start that honoring our oldest citizens. Another thing that has to do with the library, some of the people who received the cane, we did their biographies, and those hopefully are in the History Center. If not, we'll find them. But it's interesting to read these stories about living in Camden in 1910. And I think it's something that we should continue as part of the Boston Post cane program. Thank you.
Oh, that's, I didn't realize that that was an intentional effort, that the library was doing the biographies of the.
It just so, it
That's great.
happened at the same time we created the History Center. Barbara worked with Heather to interview the person who got the Boston Post cane, and then we put it together.
Oh, well, that's
So it's
great to
very
know that it's not a
interesting.
new idea. So let's definitely continue that. And maybe a few people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming out.
And it's also the reason to ensure we have someone with significant longevity who's been in the town for a long time. If the important thing is to get the history of what was it like to live in Camden in 1910, we certainly wouldn't want to have somebody that just moved here in 2020.
Right. No. I think that's true. And I think there's also, to Allison's point about having some flexibility or revisiting what the guidelines are, would be valuable. But it's for starters to start to look for who some of these folks are. And I'm sure we all know people who have been in the community for a long time that we can start to look. If you want a committee,
Right. I mean, it doesn't have to be just one person. There are so many older residents who
Yeah.
have stories. You know, the other thing is that some of them might not be living in Camden now, but let's try to pick up on the spirit of it, which was an intentional effort to share some of these stories. And
Yeah.
I think that sometimes the story of somebody who ended up in Camden later in life and is, you know, our oldest citizen is another story to highlight as well. And we could even come up with our own Boston Post cane. Maybe the Camden Herald wants to sponsor a cane of their own. And
Yeah.
mostly the intention of what Elizabeth said, which was to highlight these stories and to do it in an intentional way. And
It's lovely.
So if anybody has a candidate, they should get in touch with Holly or any one of us, and we can delegate this to Holly and to you perhaps.
yeah, then let's see if we get a bunch of people, and then a few of us can get together or figure out if it's something just that can all fit in a select board agenda, or see.
Excellent.
Hopefully we'll get a bunch of people, and then maybe we could get a small committee together or something to figure out how to do it. Ken, you'd be just the
Perfect
person to.
All right. Thank you, Allison, for bringing that to our attention.
And Elizabeth, really.
And Elizabeth.
She's the reason this is on the agenda today. So
Great.
she's always very polite, reminding me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, let's have the Ragged Mountain Recreation Area update, late edition. Late edition,
No, this is great. I was glad to see it on the agenda.
yeah.
Good evening,
Good
Jeff
evening.
Nathan, Parks and Recreation Director. I'll keep my comments very brief because you really don't want to hear from me
No?
for this update, actually.
Okay.
We're very fortunate to be joined by Aidan Eichhoff from SE Group and Steve Kasachek from Outdoor Sports Institute. I'd be and Jeremy's here, forgive me. Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for joining.
Right.
Just as a reminder, however, I do think it's important to remind the audience as well as the select board that we were able to hire both SE Group and OSI as a result of the Community Outdoor Recreation Assistance Grant that we received, which funded 100% of this work that's been done. This work will conclude as we approach September, so we're getting close to wrapping up the work. And recently, as Holly mentioned, there was a public meeting at the Camden Snow Bowl where we had an opportunity primarily to go through the multi-season recreational plan that SE Group is continuing to develop. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Aiden, who's joining us via Zoom. We have some slides that I will scroll through as Aiden is talking about them, and then we'll turn it over to Steve. So Aiden.
Sorry about that, everyone. It wasn't letting me click off mute. But hi, everyone. I'm Aiden Nykoff with SE Group. And thank you so much for fitting us in on the agenda today. We'll just have a brief presentation to catch up on where our team is at in the process, what we've been working on. You'll get a preview of some of the big ideas that we've been knocking around, and then we'll get to the timeline and next steps. Jump on over to the next slide there, Jeff. Awesome. So yeah, this general process overview diagram kind of shows what we've been working on since, I want to say, January. Impact, but in this example, that left side of the spectrum is the more local oriented sort of feeling in Parks and Recreation. And you can go all the way to the other side of the spectrum, and these are the more tourism oriented recreation facilities. So think of things that you might go to once a year or once every few years with your family or kids, that are big draws, regional destinations, Six Flags, and that have these sort of big attractions that catch your eye. And so we're kind of using this to show where the snowball is now, and then where we see it moving as a lot of these recommendations are completed. So yeah, this shows that today we're seeing Camden Snowball fairly close to the left side of the spectrum, but there is still a ski area there that attracts people from outside of your community, from outside of the state. And so you're not quite fully just at that, local community park. And that none of our recommendations we see as getting you towards the full right side of the spectrum. And part of that is because that's not what we heard as what the community was interested in. So we want to make sure that we are understanding the town's revenue generation goals and the community needs and what the market will support, but we're not trying to make this a space that doesn't feel welcoming to the community, even 10 years down the road. So these near-term opportunities are ones that are kind of building on existing assets, potentially building on the trail system that Steve from OSI will talk about, and really making sure that we're looking at programming and events that are capitalizing on these facilities. We've made some assumptions in there about the lodge and the trails, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. Long-term is, again, using that existing facilities and then adding some infrastructure that can then support further revenue generating opportunities. And that's getting you a little bit further on the spectrum of, okay, this is something that's going to land on maybe a visitor's radar. And then finally, the aspirational ones. This is an idea, or these are ideas that get us a little bit further on that spectrum and would certainly be something that maybe it's really only visitors that might be doing. So let's go to the next slide so I can stop being so squishy and get into some specifics here. So in this first phase, as I mentioned, and as Steve will talk about, there's a lot of great energy around the hike and bike trail network. Right now, it's really only something that, especially for mountain bikers, it's more of an advanced recreation opportunity. And so Steve's group has done a great job looking at ways to enhance the existing trail system, but also build or plan new trails that might open up more opportunities for novice and intermediate mountain bikers, as well as looking at some hiking specific opportunities. So we see that as like, absolutely, the energy's there, the plans are there. and that needs to move forward for the Snowball to be able to really complete this near-term opportunity. In addition to that, there's been many, many years of conversations of a new lodge at the base area. And again, we see that as incredibly important to support things like weddings and events, and even just day-to-day operations, especially during the winter. Finally, this is sort of just the programming one, but the events and the programs will absolutely impact the Snowball's ability to welcome the community and best activate the space as much as possible, and also have more potential for revenue generation. So things like family reunions, weddings, concerts, things that Snowball are already doing, but kind of increasing that. And then programs such as bike clinics, nature walks, summer lift rides, things that the Snowball might be doing at this point, but really bolstering those programs and having staff that can support them as well. Getting to the second bucket, this is the more long-term idea. I think we're seeing that as, let's say, 5 years out, give or take, where you have the trail system fully built out, it's being used, but that the lift is also likely nearing the end of its useful life and might need upgrade. So we're seeing the second phase as capitalizing on a lift upgrade to potentially add lift serve mountain biking that utilizes that great trail system and really plays on the fact that the Snowball has great elevation and lift infrastructure already.
Hold on, I'm sorry, did she say 5 years? Did she say 5 years for that, or?
Yeah, long-term is give or take 5 years. We're not.
That's when the lift might need to be replaced already? Sorry, I'll wait until the end.
No, you're good, you're good. Basically, we would just want to make sure that if you are going to use the lift more, that it can have that amount of operating hours. So I don't think there's a specific date right now that says by this year we will need to replace the lift, but generally seeing something that if you are going to upgrade it to allow for lift serve mountain biking, it is likely that you might just want to do the whole new lift at that point.
And maybe I can jump in for just a second on that too.
Yeah, please.
Alleviate some of Allison's concerns. If we were to continue to operate the lift as we do today, it likely has a shelf life much longer than 5 years. Meaning we're solely using it for fall chairlift rides and winter operations. There's very little downhill activity on the lift. We're not using it all summer long. If we are going to be serious about expanding operations and expanding the use of the lift, just like a car or any other vehicle, that there's a finite number of hours that motors have, that any type of machinery has. The more hours you put on it, the time will catch up to that eventually. So at this point, we're not saying we have to get a new lift in 5 years. What we're saying is, as we're thinking about expanding opportunities and what the potential are for things that we can do there, if we want to do those things, it will require a new chairlift. If we want lift-served mountain biking as part of our offerings at the Camden Snowball, it will more than likely necessitate a new chairlift.
But probably, no matter what, it has to be replaced at some point.
Yes.
Anyway, is that something that's been evaluated, or they don't last 100 years? Do they last 50, 20, 25? 40?
They can last. I don't have an immediate answer that says
Okay.
This is the shelf life of the lift. We perform maintenance and inspections on them every year to make sure that they are safe. If at any point I have concerns with the safety of the lift, I'll be in here talking with you about it.
Oh, we've talked about the lift multiple
Right.
times and had to put a bunch of money into it, and
Right.
yeah. So, okay.
Sorry, Aiden. Go ahead.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much, Jeff. The second item in this long-term plan is the addition of an adventure playground. In the main presentation, there were lots of concept images that kind of showed this, but there this we're kind of thinking as like some sort of combination of tree houses or those like kind of cool spidery net walks made out of rope. So something that uses a lot of natural elements, wood, rope, not too like pink, and really blends into the forest landscape. And that would, I guess we'll show those plans, but that's the second one. And then finally for the aspirational one, and I haven't updated this since the 26th meeting, but looking at the addition of something that really uses the scenic value of the top of the mountain. And so there's a new technology right now that's just starting to be integrated into a few North American ski areas and resort areas. That's sort of this combination between a zip line and a mountain coaster, so that you don't zip line, you would, traditionally be kind of roped into something straight, point A to point B downhill. And mountain coasters obviously have more of those turns. And this is something where you're kind of connected to a motor and a pulley. And so you don't actually need to, you kind of sit back in it and then it can motor you along. So it doesn't need to be straight downhill. It can sort of be a lateral loop. Again, this is something in more aspirational, so maybe 7 to 10 years. And it's definitely a if we're ready, when we're ready sort of amenity. Something that was talked about at the meeting on the 26th is that people were really interested in some sort of addition of a building, whether it be, what scale, we don't quite know yet, but some sort of food and beverage or shelter opportunity at the top of the lift there, to both support maybe some of the lift serve mountain biking operations, but definitely if we're going towards this zip rail experience, needing somewhere to just sort of process people and have them either sit and wait or just enjoy the view while they decide if they're going to go on this attraction. So these are the three. Yeah, Jeff, we can go to the overall concept there. So this, we'll get the zoom in one in a second, but what I want to highlight for you here is that in the base area, there's kind of these McMain circulation lines. So we're seeing the addition of a pump track, potentially where the tennis courts are, and then the adventure playground there is to the left of your screen. Yep, exactly. So over in what we're calling the Enchanted Forest, I think my colleague Claire made that up, but over past the Toboggan Shoe in this really just beautiful forested area, seeing as a great opportunity for some sort of adventure playground. And then we have this hiking area that is really highlighted on the map. A lot of the mountain bike trails are kind of blended more into the background here, as it would have been kind of visually overwhelming. But wanting to show sort of the main circulation loops of what we're seeing as the hiking opportunity. So there's the first green one that kind of gets to mid-mountain and then in the top of the double summit, where you would have a loop with a viewing opportunity at the top of the summit, at the top of the double. And then if you would like to go to the top, having that next little hiking line, the kind of purple blue one up to the top of the triple. So as mentioned, there's definitely a lot more trails recommended, and they're in sort of white lines that if you squint, you can see them in the background. But I know that Steve and the OSI team can talk about those more. Other things to highlight here. Actually, let's just go into the zoomed in one. Okay, other things to highlight here are the sort of skills area just to the left on the screen of the triple. So this is a place where, especially if you are going to go for lift serve mountain biking, would just be a great spot to have, a couple little features that any visitors or kids who might want to just kind of play around on their bike as maybe they're waiting for the lift or waiting for their friends to get on the trails, can have there close to where maybe their family members are at the lodge. That's the sort of hub of energy there. And then a pavilion and playground area next to the sports fields as well, to make sure that we're having opportunities for parents or other family members if they're dropping off their kid or going to see someone, or practice on the fields, that there is sort of a multi-use space for them to sit and wait or just play on the playground while they're there. The other part here is that, especially if we are having the pump track be more of an amenity and the parking there along that main road, trying to do some traffic calming as well to make sure that we're increasing the safety along that road there for all pedestrians and vehicle users. Jeff, anything else you want me to focus on in this one?
No, I think the observant eye will see we added the addition of the new lodge to the picture. And where Aiden was talking about of the amenities at the bottom, really all falls within that, right above that green space, which would sit really between the existing A-frame and the site of the proposed new lodge. So it would still be, generally speaking, in front of, both of the lodges, the existing one and the proposed, should we, get to that point.
So does this mean, I'm noticing that the A-frame looks like it does today and that there's the new lodge and none of that other stuff that we've been talking about. Does this mean that part of the evaluation abandons the idea of the addition to the new lodge and moves back to because we were kind of thinking in some ways maybe we need to be realistic about the timeline for the new lodge and do this addition to the old lodge and.
Yeah, I won't speak for Aiden. I will tell you our conversations stemmed around increasing capacity, and meaning more seating space, more public space for people to use there. We primarily talked about that as the new lodge, but not at the expense of ruling out the potential of the addition. It just, we didn't focus on that through the master planning work. Both would work. The reality is, I think what Claire and Aiden and Jeremy and I spent more time talking about was, how do we increase the public capacity in the lodge area? And Aiden, I think we talked about increasing it to 300, if I remember. Is that correct? Do you recall?
That seems right, but I don't remember if it was 300 between the two buildings or 300 in just the new lodge. Look at that.
With the different items that you've added here that aren't currently there today, I'm not quite sure what an asphalt pump track is, but I wonder, is that a really common activity that's being used as compared to a well-maintained tennis court or pickleball court could be? There are new activities here, but I'm not sure that our community kind of does those activities, that there might be something a little simpler and a little bit more current with what people do and enjoy. And as well as to Allison's question, I think it's a shame they didn't consider putting in that addition into this, because that seemed like that made sense and was a good gap measure. No pun intended, but a good gap measure before a much larger structure could be built to do that add-on, and that was the ADA piece and all that. And to me, that seemed like a good idea that is not reflected anymore. As well as, again, I'm not sure why the tennis courts aren't there. So I think there's some stuff, even like the playground thing, it's maybe a big idea, but not really centric to what we do as a community.
Yeah, and thanks for the feedback, Chris. And one thing I think it's important we mention about the tennis courts and the pump track is the pump track only exists if we already have a plan for tennis courts somewhere. So it isn't tennis courts go away entirely. There's no tennis courts in Camden and they're replaced with a pump track. The only time that we would implement this component of the plan is if we already have an approved plan for tennis courts in Camden.
I mean, it would be nice if we could get to the bottom of this tennis court thing a little bit because it comes up a lot. And then, right now, my husband was at the thing that you did at the thing of the snowball. And he was saying how there was a lot of resistance to this, getting rid of the tennis courts.
Mhm.
And I was asking, is anybody using them as tennis courts right now? No, we don't put the net up.
Dreadful condition.
I'm well
they're
aware of
disrepair.
that. And I've heard from a lot of people who really enjoy using them to let their dogs run around. And so and then people that used to use them when the net was up. And then we've gone through this thing of people saying, how much is it going to cost to fix the tennis courts? And it's going to be like $150,000. And then people say, well, that really shouldn't be that expensive. And then we go through this process where somebody who says it shouldn't be that expensive tries to prove that. And then usually it is disproven. And so the pump track where it is right now at the Snowball, if we're kind of going to double down on the mountain biking thing a little bit more, getting to that pump track halfway up the mountain, or it seems like is there any reasonable expectation that we're going to fix the tennis courts anytime soon? Or we do have other tennis courts in the community. We have the high school that we all pay for in a way.
So I have been involved in a number of discussions with different constituents within towns and within the town. And the feedback that I get is there are people who have a very strong desire to have the tennis courts rebuilt in their existing location, understanding it will be expensive to do that because of the extensive work that needs to be done because of their location. They're built right on the side of Hosmer Pond.
They're in a wetland, yeah.
It's in a wetland. I've also talked to a number of people who have a strong desire to see them move to the tannery property, including I met with the Tannery Park Committee.
It's not a committee, but there's a neighborhood group.
Neighborhood group, forgive me, misspoke. The neighborhood group who would love to see tennis courts there.
Some of the neighbors would, and then you talk to other neighbors that wouldn't necessarily. But right.
So
But-
I'm not making a recommendation today. I'm just sharing with you what I've heard from the community members, because I think whatever outcome we decide upon, that the town decides upon, you're going to have some people that are going to be very much in favor of it, and there are going to be some people that are not going to be in favor of it. What I'd like to see us do is ultimately make a decision about the tennis courts, and then I can start to budget and fundraise for whatever decision we make, so that in the future we can have working tennis courts. Two other
I don't
real
think we
quick
should
points.
start with it's a given that the town of Camden will provide tennis courts to the community, no
Right.
matter what. I think we should be careful about making that promise. I'm not saying we're going to say definitely not, but we don't have working tennis courts right now, and life is going on. And so I just think we shouldn't make that promise.
Yeah, I do on occasion see people using the tennis courts
For tennis?
for tennis.
Is there a net?
People,
We have two nets that are up, and when the crew goes out there, I ask them to, as much as they can, to trim the grass out of the existing cracks.
and
I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
yeah, well, I mean, I've been hearing a lot from various people, and obviously the tennis courts is a big issue. People haven't been playing there because we haven't maintained them. People very much want to play there. People really like playing there. But I think the bigger piece of this is I couldn't stay, I had a double conflict on the last public session, which kind of was announced a little bit late in the day, it felt like. So a lot of people have been looking at this stuff, and I know I know in your presentation you have next steps, but since we're talking about feedback and right now, I think it would be really good to have another session on this because a lot of people have watched the presentation, have looked at the slide deck since that meeting and have a lot of questions and a lot of different ideas. So I think it's important to really understand that these are recommendations. This is a proposal. Nothing is set in stone. And I just really think as our next step, I would, even in the next month, try and have another public session with more announcements.
Yeah, and to that point too, maybe this is late in the game, but though this does speak specifically to the Ragged Mountain area, but to include in that discussion, as you mentioned, maybe the tannery might be a nice place for tennis courts. Just throw it out there. But putting in our different areas that we have as part of the plan. So it's not just this particular facility, but it would be probably better for people to be able to see the other town-owned properties and including that in the vision so that it's a whole thing and that you're not just focusing on one area and giving up on another, and what would appear to be giving up on another, but instead do it as a bigger, and I'm sorry if it's late in the game to mention that, but to have the consideration for the other elements. And so that people understand that we're not forgetting about the skate park. We're not forgetting about the tannery. We're not going to leave the tannery as a place to park construction vehicles. So we're going to actually use it for recreating.
The grant and the grant and the assignment is specifically for the snowball. So I mean, they can only do so much, but Jeremy's.
Yeah, I would, thanks, Chris. And maybe I'm speaking for Jeff here, but I appreciate your comment. And that's, I think, when Aiden started off tonight, I think that's what she was trying to get at. When they approached this, they were approaching this from like a holistic Camden Parks and Rec, all of our properties. When they were here, we went to every single town park piece of property we have. We assessed it. And this is something that Jeff is working on aside from this and kind of attached to this, but this specific master plan, like Christo said, was focused on this Ragged Mountain recreation area. And we are right on board with you that we need to look at all of our assets, recreational assets, and we are doing that. And I think you'll see that kind of on a side track, but which is parallel to this, is what I would say.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Okay, I think in the interest of time, let's keep our questions on point and.
Okay. So do you want to go through the next steps or should we just transition over to Aiden, you want to hit on next steps?
Yeah, really quickly. Looking at the next couple months here, we will be completing the financial assessment. So looking at those revenue and costs of each of the programs and amenities. And then we are coordinating with Camoin Associates on the economic impact using our market analysis data. And we've had conversations about that, and we still owe them some content so that they can get their project done. And then I guess based on sort of a regroup from this meeting, we are aiming for a draft plan at the end of July. But based on Chris's comment there about public engagement and ideas, we'll kind of meet as a project team and understand how we want to tackle that. So Jeff, back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Aiden.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'll turn it over to Steve from OSI to talk through the Trail Master Plan.
Thank you. I can do my own scrolling. Hello, I'm Steve Kasanchik. I work for Outdoor Sport Institute. We do a whole bunch of stuff around, we're a nonprofit physically based in Millinocket with a PO box up in Caribou. Work all over the country, mostly in Maine though. And I am the director of trail development. And so everything I do is around trails. I have a background in civil engineering, stormwater management, worked for the International Mountain Bicycling Association as a East Coast project manager. I've managed a wide range of trail projects up and down the East Coast, from 5 miles to 30 plus miles. So yeah, been doing trail stuff for about 10 years now, and excited to be here. Just scroll, right? Ooh, already messing up. All right, so I thought I'd give you a quick background here. Oh, look at that, I did it again. So we have actually been through a couple projects with the town. So I'm going to talk first about, we did some planning work about 18 months ago is when we kicked that off in early 2024. That led to, and everything that I'm going to talk about is just focused on natural surface trails. So all the dirt surface trails out there. So we did some planning work in 2024. And a lot of that looked like this. We had a meeting at the Snow Bowl. I met with about a dozen individuals. I met with a whole bunch of groups, the New England Mountain Bike Association Midcoast chapter here, the Trail Runners, Abutters, Coastal Mountains Land Trust. So did a whole bunch of engagement and found very, very similar findings to what Aiden mentioned, which was, people love using this place. They love the trails. It's a great community resource. How can we improve it? How can we make it more accessible and just better for the people here, which would also happen to make it more of sort of a regional destination to draw folks too. In the course of all this background work, I also did a whole bunch of prior planning review. So Highland Trails came out and did a concept plan around trails in 2015. I think there was some previous planning from I think a Four Seasons committee. So there was some previous stuff that I reviewed to make sure what we were doing moving forward was kind of jived with that, but also met the current needs and the current trends we're seeing in recreation in trails. Spent a whole bunch of time walking around the mountain, doing a big, broad landscape sort of assessment for the town property. I also, before I forget, would love to mention, we are also, which is very nice, doing a joint project with Coastal Mountains Land Trust. They too have a Cora grant, and we are doing trail assessment and planning work with them on all the property that they have on Ragged Mountain, including their easements with Maine Water, and even over to Spruce Mountain across Route 17. So really nice that there's a very holistic planning effort being done. We did, went all over the mountain, took lots of pictures, lots of notes, did a trail assessment. So there's roughly 7 miles of trail out there, and a lot of it is not in the best shape. So it's not sustainable necessarily environmentally or even socially. It's not, well, when I met with people and talked to people and hear what people want, they want easier trails, they want more consistent loops, they want more variety and diversity in the trail experience itself. A lot of it is all sort of the same flavor, we would say, all very primitive type single track, of all pretty much a fairly advanced skill level. And so, that jived with, okay, it's a good time to be doing this work. The fact that we should really be upgrading these trails anyway. A whole terrain assessment, if you've not been to the Snow Bowl, it is a crazy little site. There's a whole bunch of water. There's a whole bunch of crazy drainage going on out there. When you look at the soils report, the deepest soils they call for are 2 feet in the USGS soil report. I mean, there's more soil than that in places, but there's not a lot of dirt on the mountain. Very shallow bedrock. There's all sorts of ledge and cliffs and boulder fields. It's also a ski mountain, and so there is all sorts of infrastructure out there: snowmaking pipes, electrical lines, the lifts, water bars on the ski trails. So all of this is to say that here's another example. It's I believe I told when I had one of the many meetings with Audra, Jeremy, and Jeff. Certainly one of the more difficult sites I've encountered in my time. It's a very narrow site. You've got you own all the way to the summit, so you have 1,000 feet of elevation within a pretty narrow band, very steep slopes, all the stuff I just mentioned. So a difficult site, but gosh, what a worthwhile place to put high quality trails and have really high quality trail experiences for the residents, for the people on the Mid-Coast, and for the people who come here. Yeah, certainly, as I mentioned, I've had the luck to travel all over the East Coast. They even sent me out west a couple times to do all sorts of trail projects, big, groundbreaking, really fun, awesome projects. And this, while one of the most difficult, is certainly one of the most inspiring sites I have been to in my career. And I am just so thrilled to be looking at it. It's a special place for sure. And I think the people who use it now would agree with that. All of that work culminated in a very trail specific master plan that I guess we finalized earlier this year. And so this is a sort of a working map of those trail concepts. They're the same lines you saw on Aiden's map. They just had some of them ghosted and whatnot. But essentially taking that 7-ish miles and almost doubling it. So really making more use of the site. It's a very front country site when we think about recreation setting. It's a highly developed place. It's owned by the town. It differs in setting from, say, the rest of the conservation land around that. And so it supports more density of trails, higher development of trails. So it's fantastic. A whole bunch of, as I mentioned, we're doing work with Coastal Mountains, but another constraint was making sure that we maintained access to their property. So we ended up with a really awesome spread of difficulties that the colors match up to like ski trail colors. So greens are easy trail. So we found some great easy terrain, a much better climb.
So am I getting that the emphasis on this trail infrastructure is largely focused on mountain bikes?
So out of the roughly 12 or 13 miles that are planned, only about 25% of them are just for bikes. The rest of them are all shared use. So there's an emphasis on designing the trails so that they're adequate for bikes. But there's a huge emphasis on shared use, on pedestrian use, and maintaining pedestrian access and making sure the pedestrian experience is not just kept, but enhanced too. So
And we're not just dodging bikes flying at us while we're trying to walk.
There's been a lot of thought put into intersections, they mentioned the lift. So the system's been planned, and I'll talk about the design work we're doing now, designed in such a way that if you never turn the lifts on, it doesn't matter. People can still go recreate there. If you did turn the lifts on, you would have the trails there to send bikes down. But it's designed so that it could be managed with some bike-only downhills. That's a great, what people are asking for that. This is one of the few places regionally we can do that. We can't do that at the state park. We can't do that on some of the other conservation land. It makes more sense here. It's already has a lot of development on it as a ski hill. But the vast majority of the trails are going to be designed, have been designed, and will be managed for shared use for hiking and biking.
Thanks.
And some of them are very hiking centric as well. So the Cora grant that was just kind of a brief overview of the planning work. And so the next step in all this is design, is field layout. This is Max Southam from Mount Abram. He's the lead builder and designer out there. He's been assisting us with this project. And so the design work really gets to the details needed for implementation, needed for construction. And so we are literally out there field flagging the trails. So if you haven't been to the Snow Bowl lately, if you go, you might be surprised to see a whole bunch of flagging in the woods. If you look at some of it, it's got little notes on it. That is all being fed into what I'm completing now, which is a design package, which will look essentially like sort of a set of construction documents. And all of this is to support getting the clearance, getting all the permits we need, getting contractors to provide quotes, going after the funding through the various grants that we've been talking about, and then actually doing quality control and construction management to make sure we're getting what we asked for in the first place. So a whole bunch more details going into the design work. These are just some sort of representative pictures of trails and trail types. So a more developed, that's a shared use trail right there. We've talked about some of these trails being appropriate for adaptive cyclists. There's a whole lot of rock. So certainly talking about rocky trails. I will say most of my pictures are of people on bikes, but most of the pictures have been shared use single track trails. So trails open to hiking and biking. I just happen to come from a very bike heavy background. So when I'm out on the trail, I'm on a bike. So trails like this. And these trails are gonna take more than what the mountains had so far, which has been a really awesome and really robust volunteer effort. But moving forward with the higher quality trails and really with just the landscape itself, it's a very difficult landscape. And so it's going to require just way more skill and capacity to create these trails. And so our recommendations have really been to help to look for professional contractors and then integrate. I know Jeff's looking to hire some staff, so integrate those folks in. We have some great local volunteers and some local organizations doing trail work. And so this is also an opportunity to kind of build our local capacity so that we don't always have to bring in outside help to execute projects like this. Because this is a professional crew right here, but a lot of the trails that they're going to be doing, I hope we're not doing a ton of jackhammering, but we're going to be doing stuff like that, or building really intense walls. Lots of intricate rock work is going to be required. And so we're going to need some highly skilled folks. And there are lots of people interested in this project. Yeah, I think the only last note that I would add really quickly on a personal / professional note is I live just over the mountain in Union, and grew up summering in Warren and moved my family up here to the Midcoast for these assets. And because we have really, really awesome natural landscapes and just a rich history of trails. And I think we can do even more with trails, and they just provide so many benefits for our communities. So I am just really grateful to have the opportunity to work on the mountain and work so close to home on something that I use and my family uses. So I think it's a great project, and yeah, can't wait to keep seeing it forward. No questions?
Questions or comments? Allison?
I'm wondering, and maybe this is for both of you, but in terms of reasonable expectation for, I mean, that all sounded wonderful. And, but, for years people have said, well, if the Snowball would just do this or that, if we just add mountain biking, then they could be bringing in all this money. It could pay for itself. And what's reasonable there? What would we have to do in order to be able to make this pay for itself? Or can it never do that? Or what has actually been looked at there? And then I don't know if that's a question for you, but with the other group, as you're moving into your final stage of this, are there any revenue generating opportunities that were taken off the table through like either input from town staff or people? Like things that have been brought up to me are like small campsites or RV parking, or are there things that we could be doing to help that facility generate revenue that didn't get included in this, or maybe wouldn't require a lot of building, or just basically like the financial aspect of this? Is there anything we can do other than just dream and then ask taxpayers for money?
Well, I can start there.
Yeah.
We will certainly be looking more at the details of the finances in the next few weeks. But what I will say is that our financial models are not incorporating the capital costs of a lot of these amenities. So things like the lodge and the new lift, there would not be an easily feasible way of thinking things like a new lift, which is probably anywhere from $3 to $5 million, pay for itself while still achieving the goals of a community and publicly accessible park. That is part of the reason why ski resorts are getting so expensive, is they have to incorporate some of those capital costs. Things that you mentioned, like
And so
campsite.
can I just stop you? Can we not do any of this without investing in a better lift? Like what are some are there things?
No, absolutely. You can still do a lot of, I think there's a lot of meaty projects in that short-term bucket that I mentioned, including the investments in all the trails that Steve just outlined. And the new lodge. I think there's even ways without the new lodge to still go further into the programming, but things like weddings and events, the current lodge is starting to really show its age.
But charging
So
people
that's
for
what we have
mountain
in
bike,
outdoor space.
I guess some
Sorry?
of this, like the adventure playground and all that stuff, you would, adventure playground, mountain bike trails, the idea is some of those things you would charge people to use, right? And so at
Yes.
what point, what do you have to be able to offer in order to charge for use, I guess is my question. Like lift serve, is that, I don't know the basics of this. Like, do people ever pay to go to a place and ride their bike if they don't have lift service for their bike?
So the short answer is yes. That scenario exists in the real world, both on a voluntary pay basis as well as a pay-to-play basis. We've talked about a number of those concepts. If you're familiar with East Burke, Vermont, Kingdom Trail Network, you may have heard of Kingdom. It's not uncommon for people who ride a Kingdom to pay an annual membership to join to ride Kingdom, even without going to the bike park there that you'd actually pay for lift serve bike access. That model exists in other places. That's probably the most local one to us is in East Burke, Vermont. But that concept exists. But bringing so let's say we were to secure some of the trail bond money and we're able to start building trails. Once we had more accessible beginner trails, that opens up the opportunity for things like bike camps and bike clinics. And those are our opportunities to generate revenue. When we think about the capital expenses, right? If last year the Snow Bowl made $1.3 million and spent $1.5 million to make that, it is unlikely that we would ever find ourselves in a scenario where we're earning enough revenue to compensate for the cost of a new lodge, call that $7 million, or a new lift, call that $5 million in any short period of time. Does that answer your question, Allison?
I think so. Sort of, for the most part.
Yeah.
Did they tell you to take anything off the table in terms of like camping, or did you look at any of that stuff?
Yeah, we definitely discussed the RV camping and campsites that you mentioned. And I think the one concern you would have there, well, maybe two concerns, but one is that the parking, we're already constrained in some of these sort of future scenarios and even now in the winter operations. And then it also makes the town have to become a campsite manager. And that is not something that many towns are kind of equipped to take on. And it requires some pretty significant staffing to do. Not to say it's not impossible, but those are the reasons why it wasn't really mentioned. And then there were a couple of ideas that came up on our 26th meeting where someone was mentioning things like mini golf or like a hotel at the top. And I think our team just felt that that didn't quite match with the character of the site and kind of wanting to keep that more natural environment. So kind of making sure the scale of amenities and character fit with what is currently there. So there certainly were some ideas thrown around that we are not at this time moving forward with.
Could you maybe make a list of, as part of this, of the things that were considered? I mean, the parking thing, I don't think parking at the Snow Bowl in the summer is a major problem. But just to know that, because people, all these ideas about the Snow Bowl all the time, what could realistically make money and what couldn't. I would love to have a breakdown by a professional at some point of like what are, almost even independently of whoever's assessment of the character or not the character of the area, but what is a realistic thing that could generate revenue and what is just an idea that somebody has that doesn't really add up. Just because we talk so much about ideas and without any basis for whether things actually work out. So. Thanks.
I will just add, SE Group is much more well equipped to do the financial assessment. That's not really part of our scope or my expertise. Anecdotally, people, there's a bunch of management things you'd have to think about if you ever want to charge money for access. People currently and have historically parked on town property to access the conservation land. And so now you've got to somehow figure out, are they getting charged to use that conservation land? If not, how do you decide, how do you make sure the people who pay do pay and the people who don't pay don't pay? There's a whole bunch of ways you can also access from CMLT land off the top, off the summit, and a couple off the ridge itself. So there's already these. So that would be a thing to think about. Anecdotally, really the revenue from trail-based stuff is often from events. So clinics, summer camps, concerts, races, those types of things. For a place of this size, especially if we talk about bike parks, Sugarloaf just opened their bike park over the weekend, and Mount Abram is really is a similar elevation, is well established, is much wider, has a lot more dirt. So, like, just my gut feeling is you're never going to be like the biggest and best bike park in Maine that draws people from Boston. They're going to other bike parks. So I think, thinking about the events is probably a really important thing to do when you think about the revenue. As far as the investment in trails themselves, they're a much lower investment than the lodge or a new lift. We're talking, they will be expensive trails as far as trails go, but much more on the order of like $1 to $1.5 million for that whole project. Which we've been talking about a number of grant opportunities out there, the Maine Trails program being the newest, but there's a bunch of other ones. And so I think the burden of the capital cost of the investment could be shouldered mostly through the grant opportunities out there. And then the upkeep of trails is pretty minimal. Typically we talk about just mere percents of the actual capital cost. And we have a really robust volunteer scene here that I think would only grow with better, funner trails. And so some of that maintenance, that upkeep cost can be essentially volunteers too. So.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, thanks, Steve. That was the kind of question I wanted to get at. How expensive are the trails? And what is the goal? Are we trying to double or triple the current number? I mean, hikers use those trails every day now. What effect are we hoping for by improving the foot trails and the bike trails? I don't hear them paying for themselves, but I love hiking. And I'm sort of as a parallel question, have you been in touch with the state park folks? Because they're doing a tremendous amount of trail work and getting a lot of people up on the trails there.
Yeah. So I know Eric Brooks over there,
Yeah.
their trail supervisor, and I've worked with Eric, and we've had lots of conversations around.
Yes, and they seem to be doing great with volunteers too.
Yeah. So he's got a great scene going with volunteers there. So some of these trails, I talked a lot about the professional need because I really wanted to harp on them, but some of these trails are actually very conducive to volunteers and locals helping build some of them.
So another question would be, you're working with Coastal Mountains Land Trust because that opens up not just you're describing it as a narrow strip of the mountain, but Coastal Mountain goes
Yeah.
all over the place. So when I go up Ragged Mountain, I don't think of going to the Ragged Mountain Recreation Area exclusively. I'm thinking of the whole mountain.
Yeah.
So are you thinking that way? And what kind of work are you doing with Coastal Mountains Land Trust? How are you working with them?
So that those first couple slides where I talked about basically the planning. So right now we've hung flags in the woods and we're basically trying to get this project ready to go after funds. So if we find a contractor, we can do some work soon. But with CMLT, it's just that planning level. So I have to say lines on a map, but it's the same sort of thing. It's a landscape analysis. It's been a bunch of engagement, again, with a lot of the same people, the same user groups, some of the similar abutters, Maine Water as a major landowner.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we are able to look at that very holistically. So the trail system, and as you mentioned, Ken, it is used. No one pays attention to the boundaries really. So it is used as one whole trail system. And so we are able to take a look at it like that. And so think about the way people will circulate around the trails, how we bring them to certain places and keep them away from some of the sensitive areas and that sort of stuff. We're able to do that now. So we will have one cohesive plan, but their project isn't the step that we're at right now.
I do think, just if I may,
Yeah.
when we're applying for grants, and we've talked to funders, and I think everyone is fully on board with this idea of this landscape scale project and how our project and the Camden Snowball and Ragged Mountain fits into the Round the Mountain Trail, and just the connectivity. And I think that's what is in our favor on this, Ken, when it comes to receiving funding. I'm confident that we'll be getting some significant dollars to start building these trails based on those connections that we have with the Land Trust and our other partners.
Just to add on to that more broadly, OSI has done work with Georges River Land Trust and the Rockland Bog, and the work with CMLT stretches all the way to Mount Pleasant. And so there's a little piece of, there's some town of Warren land in there, and Mount Pleasant isn't conserved by anyone right now, but essentially there's been a big regional effort to look at our existing trails from the Camden Snowball all the way and to the work they're doing in Thomaston Town Forest.
Right. Yep.
Okay, I think we're gonna wrap up if you've said what, is there another big piece of this? Because we've got a couple more big substantive items on our menu as well. Any other big questions from the
Yeah,
board?
I actually, I wanted to ask a question of Aiden. This idea of the adventure playground canopy trail, that's a new concept to me. I don't know anything about it. I don't know how that would work. On the map, that's a very wet and rocky area to develop. Can you give me a very short idea of what that is?
Yeah, I will recommend that you write down the name of a company that does a lot of this work. It's called Beanstalk Builders, and they have a really, really beautiful website that shows a lot of their installs. I don't know if I can share screen or anything like that, but either way, I just would recommend everyone looking it up. They're a really, really interesting company. And so they can make things that are fully ADA, well, maybe not fully, but have a lot of ADA accessible amenities and can be fun for the whole family, we'll say. So I would recommend that, but I would say that the structure doesn't need to have just an open flat space. It can kind of be built into the landscape on whatever it needs to. So that's a great company to look at and can kind of give you an idea of the character of what we're talking about there.
Thanks. Yeah, I will. It sounds like a considerable amount of infrastructure. I just want to point out that there are bits and pieces of the obstacle course still scattered up there along the cooler trail. So
Okay.
and that speaks to ongoing maintenance. To whatever gets built needs ongoing maintenance. But I also, is just one more comment where, you made it clear that there was a range, a spectrum of local, low impact to tourism, high impact. And I'm glad to see you immediately said that there was no recommendation to build a water slide out there. So I want to underscore that there isn't any enthusiasm for such a development. And I'm pleased to see you're not going that route.
Oh, I don't know, but I don't want a hotel, but a water slide. My father-in-law years ago was very involved in that, he tells me, and could have been the real ticket to everything. Just kidding. But I agree with Ken. I was curious, just sorry to follow up on the adventure playground just a tiny bit, but what would be the benefit? Like, is it the idea that if you build this, it'll be so amazing that people will pay to use it? Or where did that idea come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're seeing this actually at a lot of resort areas and resort towns. I don't know if you all have seen the pictures of those like kind of wooden trolls in the forest that some people build in. If you haven't seen them, it's probably a crazy thing for me to say, but if you have seen them, you know
Like
what
at
I'm
the
talking
botanical
about.
gardens?
Yeah.
They kind of move around, but they're 30-foot high
yeah,
big
okay.
old structures that definitely attract people who are maybe in Camden for the weekend and want something, a little nature walk to do with their family. So this is something that we see that can be built on a scale that people would pay for. The way that it's priced for locals or free to locals and not if you're out of town, all of that is very much TBD. But we certainly do see people pay for this level of adventure play. Sometimes people are sort of clipped in on ropes and harnesses. So kind of think of that like tree canopy experience can kind of be built into this too. And I would say in general, there were some comments at the beginning of, maybe traffic being a little lower this year in town. And what I would say is we're still seeing that, especially in the summer months, there's a lot of people coming through town who are often looking for something to do with their families and groups. Many of them, as we saw in a Maine State Parks report, are going over to the state park and driving up to the top. There's about 180,000 people who go there. And so even just the Snow Bowl attracting a small percentage of the tourists coming through town or people who are looking for some sort of scenic experience with a view, we certainly see could come here. And that's part of the reason why we were concerned about reducing parking capacity with camping. Big numbers, and if you even just get a small slice of those, you're full. So yeah, I would recommend looking into those. Some of the photos from Beanstalk Builders to get a sense of the scale of it. But then welcome any future questions or thoughts. Jeff will kind of consolidate those and pass them along and we'll talk as a group. But I really appreciate the questions. Yeah.
It'd be great if we could, with public input, I agree with Chriso and that a lot of people now that they've looked at this a little bit more have more comments. And I think it's always going to be hard to capture everybody at a meeting, but if we can find a way that people could provide comments electronically in some way, that kind of like what Maine DOT has been doing, or that we would probably increase the quality and
I know we need to move on. I just, as part of that, there's a lot of misinformation floating around because things like water slides and hotels at the summit have been mentioned. There are a lot of people who think that that's part of the plan. And so there's a lot of confusion and misinformation going on around. So I think just having some more sessions would be very, very helpful too.
Yeah, thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. Okay. Yes. Well, the discussion with Montessori is going to take a while, and they've been waiting for 2 hours, so I didn't expect that was going to go so long. Well,
everybody
sorry.
likes the Snow Bowl. Don't get mad.
No,
I mean, it's just exciting.
I just don't want them to have to wait, and I know that this is going to be more substantive than it's not a slam dunk, so just don't want to be here all night with it. So we're discussing the lease with the Montessori school for the building at 50 Main Street. And we have a draft lease that's in our packet. I believe that, have you all had a chance to look at I hope you have looked at the updated marked up lease that was circulated?
When was isn't the select board packet supposed to go out on the Friday before the meeting or the Monday?
Yeah, I think we just need to stick to the
What,
select
what
board.
is the, don't go away. It's a question. We
Yes,
do have certain
and
timeframes that we need to go ahead and prepare documentation. And do we have the current lease? And so that we can see what is the variant between the current lease.
was the email that you circulated, did that go to the whole board with the changes
That
today?
changes to,
Okay.
I have not seen anything with changes.
I mean, let's just say right now that we're looking at a draft version, and probably we should take away the expectation that we would be ready to
Yeah, I've no.
vote on this. I think it would be
Yeah,
nice to we haven't had a chance to talk about it as a select board. We have a draft version to look at, then we can,
and we did hear from Bill Kelly this afternoon suggesting that we either sign the draft with the agreement that we would continue to, how did he phrase it? That we would continue to work the details, or that we table it tonight, subsequent to our conversation today. Since all the changes were not in the packet, I mean, I understand that there was discussion with Audra. I think that it's important that the whole board, because we're working on a board-to-board level now, our board needs to, we've spoken, you've spoken with Audra, but we are functioning as a board who all need to see what the conditions are. That being said, wondering now, do we introduce the other?
I just think that overall, we
Points.
haven't had a chance to, we briefly talked before about as a select board, we talked about what their lease said before with the school district. And then that there might be some changes when it came to the town, and that, I know I expressed to Audra some concerns that I had with some bounced around ideas, but we haven't, as a group, gotten to hear from the select board what are the important things. We only had a chance to speak, Krista wasn't even on the board before when it came to us, so is the draft that was in the packet was fairly close to what you guys feel? I think we have to assume that everybody's just looked at what's in the packet at this point.
What if you just went through each number on the lease that's in the packet and discuss each one of those and bring up whatever the points are back and,
Well, and I think once we get past 6 or 7, it's boilerplate. Really, the essence of the
Yeah.
the meaty parts of it are in the first four paragraphs that lay out. Oh my God, why is this happening to me? Okay. So.
Isn't there also an expectation, though, that the select board packet is a public document and should be provided to people in enough time so that other people in the community are able to see this prior to it being?
And it has been, so that's what we're
No,
working
not-
off of.
but-
We're going to work off of what was in the packet. And then where there are changes that have been suggested, we can discuss those, but they're not part of what we're going to work off of. But we'll just, in order,
Can we just make one comment that when we had a great meeting with Audra and Holly and followed up with a phone call before Audra left, she said that we would be able to see the draft before it went into the packet. So I think what's difficult is that our lawyer and our board didn't see the packet. And so now we're kind of trying to backtrack. And I think we're all trying to work towards a great outcome, and which is very positive, but it's a little bit confusing because the conversation that was had and then what went into the packet are different. So our recommendation is to pause, and it feels like Holly and Audra and we were on one page that I think was a very positive page. And so, you know, our lawyer hasn't even seen this draft, so we
Well, and
don't,
the same is true on our side, and I
we
think
just
that,
don't feel comfortable. Like she said, I'm here to help you and I haven't seen the draft. And I
Yeah.
said, well, we were moving forward and we were told that you would see it before it went in the public packet because
Yeah.
we respect the process very
so,
much.
so your suggestion then at this point is that rather than get into a really meaty discussion, that we recirculate the amended version that goes into the packet for our next meeting so that everyone gets a chance to look at all of it. No, I think that that's
Yeah.
really going to save us a lot of.
Right.
A lot of back and forth today and then come
Yeah,
back again
no,
and do the
I-
same thing again.
And I think in fairness, you know, with all due respect to Audra and Holly and to you all, this is a board to board level conversation. So to the extent that our board wasn't fully in the loop at the moment of this meeting in respect to this process, I appreciate, and I'm sorry that you had to wait 2 hours to say this.
Well, we
Um,
wanted to bring to the board what myself as the head of school and Audra and Holly
Yeah,
and Caleb came to the meeting and Audra reached out to the two of you was
yeah,
our shared, please take a look at this.
right. So
So-
if the marked up version, and if it's really emphasized which those changes are, in order for everyone to have a chance to look at the things that you feel strongly about, and I know in my conversation with Caleb today, that would help us.
Yeah.
That would really speed the
And I
conversation
think
along.
in respect to people having the time and honoring that the public access to the playground, you know, it's not that we have a lease with the town and it's just our, you know, providing childcare and early childhood education. There is a component that I think having it, we all want it to be done right so that it lives well beyond our time.
Mhm.
And that piece of it, you know, adds a level of wanting to make sure everyone's on the same page in terms of liability and costs and expenses.
Yeah, and I think to that end, we're talking about a public access that has deep meaning for this community on
Yeah.
so many levels, financially, emotionally, historically, and to the extent that we can have a really much more comprehensive discussion, you know, it's going to be in everybody's benefit.
Yes.
So.
I mean, yeah, and I think those are all things, but the major parts of the lease, without having a select board discussion at all, again, sort of with all due respect to Audra and Holly, they went the conversations that you had went fairly far in terms of both reducing the rent and increasing the town's responsibility for capital expenditures. And so that's what, and I think there's a really good argument to be made for a lot of that based on some of the things I had learned before. But if the rent is going from $35,000 a year to $20,000, I think is what it says there. I mean, I could see good arguments for that because of all the expenses that go along with the building, but then also adding the reimbursement for, you know, the crediting, using the rent to credit or pay back the school for investments made. Like we know the painting is going to be expensive, and then I just want to, I'm not sure how close we are to actually turning into something that could cost the town money, where it's like, okay, well,
Right.
you don't have to pay your rent for the next 4 years because of the expense of the painting, and then something else breaks, and then I feel like it was,
So,
Can I just add just before?
Yeah.
So if we just imagine that the town is the owner,
We don't have
And-
to imagine that.
well, I don't know if
I
it's
don't
been
know if it's
transferred yet,
actually-
but, and the school is the tenant, and take out all of the history, right? As a nonprofit serving the children and families in this community, we feel in offering to front all the capital expenses that we're doing a service and helping, right? And there would be no other, I mean, the lease with the school district was absolutely wrong. Like, yes, you can look at, oh, it went from 35 and you paid the capital, but whoever agreed to that lease, it was wrong. The school owned the building. We put $90,000, the boiler and the roof. Like, we're a nonprofit trying to provide for this community. Like, that was years ago, but we're trying to say what's fair between a landowner, a property owner, and a tenant. And we really want, and we're thrilled, we really want this partnership to be really positive, because it is such, it's so great having children there and families that enjoy it on the weekend. So I think we're all moving to the same place. What we're asking for is the time to discuss what is truly fair or not fair in terms of an owner and a tenant.
Chriso.
yeah, I think what might be really helpful would be to sort of do like an annotated lease, or, to sort of move forward from this draft lease and bring it back to us with a sort of a memo of some of the history, some of the explanations, because right now it's all a little piecemeal, but if there was just like a one-page memo saying, here's what this would look like, that we could see before having discussions, and providing some of that history would be very helpful.
Mhm. And you want to see that from the school side or from our side? What would be
I
most
would kind of think of both a little bit. I mean, what are Audra's thoughts? What are Rachel's, that. So I'm just trying to sort of streamline so that we don't have to go back and forth in a meeting
Yeah.
on it. If we could have that in advance to really get some of those questions answered before we talk about it, would be really helpful.
So,
there's no substitute for us at some, because just like you guys have board meetings where you talk
Right.
about it all, and you guys
Well,
have thoughts
no,
from board.
that's what I'm,
For us to know here, this is a public building, we should be talking
Right.
in public about the concerns.
but I think
and
to
it is a little
Chriso's
messy, but
point, to streamline it somewhat with some more background, because not all of us have been a part of this since its inception. My question too is, where does this put you? What's your standing currently for starting the school year?
they have a lease with the school district.
You have a lease with the school district, but once the ownership of the building transfers.
Well, that would be, I think, a question for the school and town attorneys to make sure that lease was assignable.
Yeah.
It would be assigned to the town, and those terms would exist until, I believe, June of 2026.
So
We obviously, though,
Let's not transfer it quite yet.
we obviously have a lot of pressure, though, because if we can't actually work something out here,
of course.
admittedly, we thought this was nearly baked. And
Yeah.
there's going to be some, minor things here, and it seems like we're a little further behind. So all of a sudden now, I think we're feeling a little bit of pressure that June 2026 date is all of a sudden maybe a lot more
Of
relevant
course.
again, and impacting our families that we serve.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think to that end, I would be willing to see this come back in 2 weeks.
yeah.
Yeah, I
with-
can work with Rachel and Bill, and we can
Yeah.
put something together that will be something for you to look at in the packet, and you can take it from there.
Yeah.
Is
And I-
it also possible in the packet to include the current lease, just so, as a frame of reference, what the current lease is with the school, so we could at least, stare and compare what the differences are in the expectations? we definitely want to make sure that the people, with Montessori school feel secure. This is just a matter of working out the details so we've got the right thing. I wouldn't, being in your shoes, I know it could be tough thinking, oh, they're going to go round and round on this stuff. Not perpetually, but we just give us the right frames of reference of the old one, the new one, so we can see it, do it in timely manner so that's prepared with the packet, that it has received the review that you want, and so the legal thing is done. Summary of the big expenses that you've had to do and take care of. Even if you were good enough to do a summary of what the differences are between the school lease and this lease, a brief like that is helpful.
Happy
to make sure that it's understandable by the whole audience that needs to see it with enough time. We definitely don't want to, as a group, I wouldn't think, and we wouldn't want to hold back your business and the service that you do, or have you afraid that, oh my, we'll never come to a conclusion. Yes, we will. And we just need to make sure we do it with the right amount of oversight and the ability for people in town to see it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Chris. So I think that, don't be discouraged.
Right.
I
That's
think that
the short way of what I was trying to say.
I think that
Thank you.
our intention is to pull this together so that it works for all of us, but we just need for it to be open and transparent, and so that people in town understand, because it's their property.
Yeah. You're on the spotlight
It's
now.
It's terrible.
Maybe somebody could just pull down the thing for,
That's okay, they'll leave in a minute. Or leave
maybe
after
sometimes they back in and they stay for a while.
That's true. So I appreciate your flexibility, and we will work over the next, between now and when the next packet is prepared, to have the most comprehensive information for us to look at and to make the best decision all around. But I appreciate your flexibility, and thank you for your patience. I hope you enjoyed everything that you heard here.
Oh, I love taking on those trails.
Thank you so much.
It is really hard for town staff to be, like, when you're speaking on behalf of a board that hasn't spoken about this, they're just in a difficult position to be able to say what's going to fly or not fly.
Right, and we were in discussing with them, we were not speaking for anyone. We were just looking at a document saying, okay, yeah, that looks fair. We understand your changes, but we don't know what the select board's going to decide, and so it needs to go to them is basically what.
Yeah, and I think that the edits express the needs of the school as a nonprofit looking at taking on this building, which is not without its challenges.
Yeah, before I will say that one of our first just on that note, because it maybe frames Allison's earlier comment, our first pass of this was a much more standard, probably like modified gross lease, where the landlord, the town, would be responsible for capital expenditures, paint, aging windows, roof, etc. We, the tenants, would pay rent. That would be even at a triple net lease, a very limiting lease, like a triple net, the landlord would still be typically responsible for the shell of a building. You typically wouldn't ask a tenant to come in and maintain a nearly 200-year-old building. I mean, as a tenant.
The yacht club does, you got to look at,
And that's
a strange animal.
Yeah, but I mean, typically that wouldn't be what you would expect coming into a normal lease, right? That would be an atypical lease. You may have an example, but for every one of those, I probably have 100 other ones, right? So that's kind of that was our first attempt, just like, oh, let's frame this standard. Audra felt very strongly that the town administrators, did not want the burden of facilitating these capital expenditures. So we offered that we would take them on, front the cost, and recoup it in rent. So which is kind of an atypical thing, this lease, and that's just wanted to frame that, just like for.
So there may be I won't say a net benefit to us, but a benefit to the town to not have to line up a painting contractor to take care of the outside of the building, where all of that, putting out RFPs and all would fall onto you.
Yeah, but I
and
think
we
what
would
Chris said is
agree-
really the heart of it, that when we took on, when we're, it was in the news quite a bit that the Montessori school wanted to stay under the current terms. I understand that there
I'm sorry,
was-
that's, no, I'm sorry, that's
well, that there
inaccurate.
was a desire for the school district to extend that deadline. I understand that that the terms may not have been favorable to you all, but what the residents had a little bit of as a benchmark is the agreement with the school. And so I do think having that lease, I guess it was my understanding when we were talking about this before, that anything more favorable than the lease that you currently have with the school district would have been welcomed. And so I think, and I felt like I was able to say to the community with confidence that we're not taking on some kind of major liability white elephant. And so, I mean, I think you guys have done a great job taking care of it and all of that. But
Definitely.
we have to make sure that we're protecting the town enough, and that we've no desire, I don't think at this point, to go through a
Right.
process of figuring out like who else wants to be in that
Yeah,
building.
and that's a real
What will this
consideration,
person
right?
pay? That's the only way to figure out how much is the building really worth. What
Well-
could we get somebody to pay for in rent? We don't want to do that, but how do we tell the community that we're getting a good
Yeah.
deal for everybody?
Right, and kind of like this net neutral thing where it's not going to cost the town, taxpayers a bunch of money. It's not going to sink like a childcare facility in the community. This like really kind of neutral thing that works for all parties. That was of course, the impetus of this. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I think that's why if we can table this
Yeah.
and get some of that information that we can process and come back in 2 weeks, I think we'll be in a much better place to understand where those conversations were.
Yep.
And then we'll be able to finish it up.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Love it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
again. Okay, now we have the approval, Chief, of the agreement with the Camden River House for crew quarters for the fire EMS.
I hope this is much more simple. But I want to start off by saying that, Travis's passing has affected a lot of folks, and we sometimes don't celebrate folks when we should. And we have an opportunity on Saturday to celebrate Chief Keller's retirement from after 37 years as the fire chief in the town of Hope. So Saturday, 1 o'clock at the Hope Corner Fire Station, we're going to be celebrating Chief Keller and his many years of service to the town of Hope, as well as being a very good neighbor to the town of Camden. So invite anybody to come to that who would like to. The lease with the River House Hotel is just a part of our whole budget process for the last couple of years, and transitioning from just being a fire department that has people on staff 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. to being a 24-hour service that also is collaborating with Northeast to provide the ambulance service to the community. And because we don't have space in the public safety building for lodging and locker rooms, we needed to find another space in town, and the River House is like
Right there.
right there. And just the space in general, so you understand what that is. When David designed David, and I think your brother helped design the hotel. They
We'll go with that.
they planned for a manager's quarters in the basement and a maintenance person. So there are like 2 efficiency apartments. There's no kitchen space in, unfortunately, but 2 efficiency areas in the basement of the hotel, closest to the public safety building. So it's literally right across the alleyway. exit on the ground floor. So using those spaces for crew quarters while we're planning renovations to the building so that we can add those spaces to the public safety building, which is included in the FY26 budget.
And are you satisfied with the condition of the space?
We will be.
Okay.
We will be. It's going to, it hasn't been used for many years.
Yeah.
So
I can just.
there was somebody working on it, but it will be.
Okay.
So what did you say the anticipated duration of the lease or the rental would be?
So the lease itself is for 5 years, and I chatted with Bill. Bill Kelly wrote the lease, so that's something that Bill did for the town. The lease is for 5 years. With 6 months, we can opt out of the lease. 6 months notice, we can opt out of the lease. We met with the architect that we're going to work with, Joe Rosilio, and we're probably going to be working with him over the course of the late summer and fall to adjust the plans that we worked with. And he anticipates that we'll probably be ready to put that out to bid late spring, early summer next year with, probably a 12 to 18 month construction process. So the 5-year lease should cover it, and hopefully we'll be finished before that.
Well, it is right there. Have you ever had occasion to use it before? The River House, that is.
Use the River House?
Yeah, for crew quarters.
No.
Okay.
We haven't.
And will it be used fairly consistently every night?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. So our plan is the FY26 budget was added 2 new positions. So we actually did an assessment last week. We made job offers over the weekend. And so we have 2 new folks we're going to be bringing on.
Excellent.
So that we will change our shift schedule probably around September 1st so that we'll adjust the 24-hour shifts somewhere around September 1st. So then we'll have people on 24 hours a day beyond that, which will be nice because, I got up at midnight yesterday to go to the Samoset and then at 2:30 to go to some place on Elm Street and then 2:15 this morning to go to LeGrand Drive. So I'm hoping I won't have to do that as much anymore.
So will, with the ambulance that will be parked at the facility, will the quarters also be for Northeast?
Yes.
As well?
Yes.
They'll also use it too?
Yes. Yep. So the plan is to staff the ambulance 24 hours a day starting October 1st.
Okay.
Yep. So we give our folks a chance to give our folks the month of September to transition to doing 24-hour shifts and the shift schedule.
So some in Northeast will use this facility too?
Yes. Yep.
As well as?
Yes.
As well as you?
Okay, I didn't realize that, but that makes sense. Is that a shared, are they paying for some of it too? Or is this just part of the larger agreement that we have with them, that the town is taking on this cost? And
Right, as part of the larger agreement. Part of it was that we would provide them with space for the 24-hour coverage.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Great job. That's really exciting to see that this is finally happening. This has been a long time coming, and seeing that ambulance there is actually really cool. Driving by, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's happening. So
It is happening. It started happening last Tuesday. We were there waiting for them to show up at 6 o'clock. There was a little group waiting for it to happen, and it's been 8 days, and the first 6 days were very busy. Today's been, never mind.
Don't say it.
Yeah, the day was pretty uneventful. So,
Right.
but it's going well. Obviously, anytime you start something new, there's a few bumps in the road, but the communication is wide open, and we sit down and we chat and we talk about things and we see how we can make it better. we'll probably get together with Rick Petrie, the CEO, sometime in the next couple of weeks and sit down, and Corey's the local base manager, and we'll sit down and we'll chat with Rick about some things that we might want to look at doing a little differently, and how we can make sure that we keep doing a good job.
So I guess even though Audra is signing this, we approve it.
We authorize her to sign it, or authorize
Right.
her representative to sign it, or?
Yeah, we have to approve it, but there is one minor glitch that the term of the lease commences June 30th. So I don't know if that needs to be amended in the final signed document.
Oh, right, starts June 30th, 2025, and,
Bill will be here tomorrow. I can check with him tomorrow.
Yeah, so I mean, it just needs to be amended
Yep.
or annotated somewhere, but.
Yep, okay. Thank you, Krista, for spotting that.
Right, because would we start paying then, or would we start paying when we occupy it? And
I think the thing to do is chat with Bill and have.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a little quick query for Bill to clarify, but we can have him and Audra and Holly take care of that.
So can I have a motion to approve?
So moved. I move that we approve the lease agreement with the River House Hotel.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Excellent. Thank you,
Great.
Chief, and thank you
Thank
for
you.
your patience. And seeing no further business in the room, can I have a
Move to
motion
adjourn.
to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Excellent. Thank you. All right, that was
Good
the
night.
best possible outcome.